Warning: the following podcast features views and opinions that are likely to trigger the extreme fanboys and fangirls who disagree with them. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome back, everyone, to another exciting episode of Hot Takes with Billy Biz. And today I'm talking about one of the most requested titles, really, that anyone has ever wanted out of this show. And it's a hard one to do. There's not a lot of TV shows that I do on the show because it requires me to really watch the show. We're talking about ABC's Lost, and this is one that I've actually been wanting to do for a while. I've been kind of chipping away at Lost, rewatching it, getting it back in my brain over the past however many months. You watch an episode here and there, but I can't talk TV without my original TV talking pal, the person that watches more TV than there are hours in the day somehow. Welcome, ROXY STRIAR.
You know, we don't use the word pal enough anymore. I feel like pal's such a endearing term. I am your pal. I'm your TV pal, Billy.
You're my bud. You're my pal.
I'm your bud and pal.
I also used butthead the other day, and I was like, I can't remember the last time I used butthead.
Did you use it in terms of you were introducing a guest?
No, I was just talking.
That would be amazing. She's my TV butthead.
I was watching something on TV. I was like, he's such a butthead.
Yeah, I feel that. And I have a feeling I know what you were watching.
Yeah, there's not a lot to watch on TV right now. But that wasn't the case back in 2004 when Lost came out. Let's
2004?
Yeah, it was a long time. It doesn't feel like it, but Lost was a long time ago.
Wow, I feel lost thinking about that. That is a different, not close to this era of my life. Like 2004 was a different Rocks, a different Lost. Weird.
I'll say that 2004 was also a very different era of television. And let's talk about that first and foremost. When you think about the golden age of television that we're in right now, I mean, you know, the first thing that really pops into my head is like a show that kind of felt like a movie week to week was Game of Thrones. But if you go back in time to 2004, I mean, Lost was a monster show. It was one of, if not still, the most expensive pilots ever in the history of television. I kind of feel like that's what first and foremost set Lost apart from other shows, where it's like we were used to the procedurals, we were used to the 3-cam sitcoms, and then the 1-cam, you know, The Office type shows. But then here comes this show on network television, and it is a movie every week.
Yeah, and there was also so many frickin' characters. Like from the jump, from the pilot. I mean, there was somebody for kind of everybody, and they did such an excellent job of being like, this is the pilot. Now, you know, if you're not watching this, you're missing out. You're missing on the one water cooler show that there is. Like, this was the one that everybody was talking about. And it really did a different job than any other pilot that I had seen prior to this. But it was a different time, Billy, because like without that social media presence, it wasn't like we knew that we were about to get this pilot. The anticipation wasn't the same that it is now for a show like a Game of Thrones, where there is so much more. You know that the advertisements have Jon Snow's face on them, so how is he going to be returning? This like came in a way that I think it took everybody by surprise.
It's also, and I don't think people realize it until much later, which is where I feel like some people hopped up, was, you know, it's kind of built as like this thriller, this, you know, these survivors on this island and something's coming to get them. But the sci-fi element to this show was almost like giving a dog a pill and peanut butter. It was because the person that introduced me to this show was my sister, and my sister has never seen a Star Wars. She has never ever cared about anything sci-fi or Lord of the Rings, any of that stuff. And she was like, hey, there's this show and it's pretty crazy. Like, you should watch it. So I feel like the general audience, maybe this was almost like dipping their toe slowly into more of like a sci-fi realm.
I feel like not just the audience, but also a little bit with the production team because, what they believe to be sci-fi might not have been as fleshed out as some sci-fi projects ended up being in the long run. But yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you that I think that a lot of people, when they found this, thought they had found the gem. Like, because of the lack of conversation going into Lost, and if you were one of the few that was watching it when it first came out that first week, you needed to tell all of your friends, this is the show, everybody see it. You haven't seen Lost yet? How could you have missed Lost? It is the one to watch. So I'm not surprised that your sister, who was not on the War of Stars, was on the Lost train.
Were you on the Lost train from the get-go?
Yeah, I was, but I was lucky enough to have a mom who was on like the entire television train. So because you know me, Billy, and I've always been me from day one. I watched 4 soap operas growing up, which means that 4 hours a day, every day, 5 days a week, I watched All My Children, One Life to Live, General Hospital, and Port Charles, and those were ABC soaps. So if you were on ABC after I was done binging my 4 hours of soap operas, then I was watching you, and that's where Lost was. So I watched everything, and like things that were way above my age range. I watched everything. That I watched more TV as a child than possibly I do now. And I was
How's
a kid.
that? He was like
2004.
humanly possible.
I don't know, but when you're saying 2004, I'm like, that makes a lot of sense because that was like prime time TV watching years for me.
It's you brought this up, and it may be the biggest criticism that people have of the show, which is just like, there's this all these mysteries that are thrown out, this grand plan, and then you get to the end, it's like, but did you really know? And let's start there, because there's
You're really
another
throwing us
show.
in, aren't you? Just gonna make us go right there.
Oh, look, we don't have time to waste. I'm not going to waste our listeners' time as they maybe felt that Lost wasted their time. There's another show that I kind of feel had a similar situation pop up, which was, interestingly enough, How I Met Your Mother. This was something where clearly from the get-go, from that pilot, when he says, and that's how I met your Aunt Robin, that you knew that there was some sort of plan that they had in place. And then when you get to the series finale, however many seasons that show was, 8, 9, something in that ballpark, the last scene was shot, the kids at least, years and years and years earlier. So you knew that they had somewhere to go. And I feel like the reason why that show suffers so horribly, and that finale to me is such a slap in the face, is because the show did evolve in all that time, but they were beholden to this one path that they were pretty much had their hands tied to. And while Lost maybe suffered, especially the beginning parts of season 3 of like, where are we going with this? I kind of feel like the argument of like, you should know every beat of every episode of every part of this show that you're going to put on the air, I kind of feel like that's not the right way to tell a story.
I think it's a really fine line because I'm with you, Billy, that one of the biggest monstrosities that ever took television and my screen was the How I Met Your Mother finale. It rivals the Dexter finale for 2 of the worst finales I've ever seen in my entire life, where you feel as a fan hurt. Like you feel like you have been wronged watching that because they clearly don't care about you anymore and have thrown you out to pasture. Like that's like the worst feeling that you can have as a TV fan. And I definitely didn't have that for the Lost finale. I didn't feel betrayed. I didn't feel like I wanted to punch my TV screen in the face. That is my TV screen. I didn't have those feelings, but I think that as a showrunner, there's a reason why if you're pitching a show and you are not a massive showrunner, if you're Ryan Murphy, you don't really have to present much stuff. If you're J.J. Abrams, if you're Damon Lindelof, like if you're Shonda Rhimes, if you're one of the bigs, if you're one of the greats, you go in, you sell a show based off of smiling. You don't really go in and sell a show based off of the whole Bible. But the reason why most people have to present their show Bible when they go in, which is essentially an outline of their show, is because we want to know that you have a plan. And it doesn't mean you can't deviate from the plan. It doesn't mean that when you see the fans interact and all of a sudden they ship a couple that you weren't expecting, you can't get them together, or they have an ending that they want in mind, that you can't have some fan service. But I would like to know that you know where you're intending to go, and then you're malleable enough to change. How I Met Your Mother clearly suffered from being like, we know where we're intending to go, and we actually don't give a flying F what you guys want. This is where we're going. Doesn't matter to us what you say. Lost kind of suffered from the opposite of that, as they've talked about many times. We actually don't know where we're going, and we're just gonna like see, and then like try out some couples. No, that didn't work. Oh, did it work? Some of you got yeah, maybe. And that, I think, was a struggle for them. But again, I think Lost is one of the best series of all time, and I'm not as harsh on it as a lot of my friends are, because I just kind of put my hands over my eyes during the parts that I don't like, and I'm like, and then I'm back in because I just still think it's so great.
Well, it's kind of the difference between, and I think, just reading interviews with the showrunners, with Carlton Cuse and Damon Lindelof, like, this is a show that, while it's very plotty, and certainly a lot of those plot threads get either dropped or maybe not satisfyingly explained, the show is not really about the plots. It's about emotions and feelings and characters. These people are lost in the sense of who they are, and a lot of times, like, the show is about these people coming to grips with their pasts, or coming to grips with who they are, what they've been through, et cetera, et cetera. So, when we're talking specifically about that finale, and it's like, do I really need to know why the bird sounded like he was saying Hurley? Do I really need to know why that statue had 3 toes? Like, I was able to figure out, okay, well, this place is pretty weird. There's a lot of crazy stuff that happens here, and people live here a very long time. I get it. Something must have happened in the past. But what's really important to me is, like, how do I feel about these characters at the end of their journey? And I kind of just feel like if I had to trade off getting an answer that maybe wasn't even as good as one that I would come up with on my own in my head, or getting the emotional payoff, I feel they made the right choice giving me those emotional payoffs.
But hopefully you set yourself up in a show in which you don't have to make that choice. Because the only reason they had to make that choice was because they tied their own hands a little bit there, where they could either give us that emotional payoff, or they could say, here's why all of that stuff was happening. And it was because they spent so much time on character development and such a lack of time with things explaining why there are polar bears, 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42, the toes, Walt, some of these big questions that people continued to have, that they kind of threw in for sci-fi sake, for strangeness sake, and some of the payoffs weren't as big. The fact that we have a finale in which 50% of the people thought that the explanation was that they were dead the whole time, that they had been in purgatory, and that's so opposite from what it is that the other 50% of the people believe, it means that I think they didn't flesh out some points to the extent that they had hoped that they had, and some of the things that they thought had been clear were very much so not clear.
So before we recorded this, I sent you a link to watch an epilogue. It's about a 12 to 15 minute mini episode that they shot specifically for the DVD and Blu-ray release of the complete series and season 6. And it's called The New Man in Charge. And so this came out, 5-6 months after the finale had aired. And it's basically all of those answers. Well, not all of them, but a lot of the answers to some of maybe those kind of questions, the logic questions, the plot questions.
Polar bear, yeah.
So before I even talk about this, A, had you seen it before I told you about it? And B, what were your thoughts maybe rewatching it now? Like, did that scratch an itch for you?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely had seen it, because I don't know that I can state this clearly enough. I was a die-hard Lost fan, still am. I love Lost, despite knowing its flaws. It's one of my favorite shows of all time. I love this show. So when you are that big of a super fan, you go after all the information you can get. You get all the DVDs. You watch all the extra content. And I will say that at the time, because like you said, it came out a few months later. I mean, what year would that have been? Like, that was years ago.
That was 2010 or 11, somewhere in there.
It's been almost a decade since I've seen this. So now, at the time, I kind of remember being more grateful for the answers. Like, oh, that's cool. That makes sense. Now I'm kind of, as I've deemed myself to be more of a TV expert, as I've studied television more, I kind of look at that and think, it's, if you think you have to do that, you missed something. If you think you have to explain yourself to that extent, either you didn't feel confident enough in your own show, or you're trying to appease a fan base that, like, I don't know that you should be trying to appease. So I don't think it holds up as well as they were hoping it did. And I think probably I'm one of 5% of people who watch the show who's actually even seen it.
Yeah, I'd say there's about 4 minutes in that thing that I really like when so to give you the gist, if you haven't seen it, and it's kind of a little hard to track down online, but essentially Benjamin Linus, this is after the finale, Hurley is now the new man in charge in the island, and Benjamin Linus shows up to a packing and shipping facility for Dharma, and he tells the guys, "Hey, we don't do this anymore. We're shutting you down." They're like, "You can't just tell us we're shut down. What's going on here?" And he plays them one of the Dharma Initiative videos that we've gotten so used to in the series, and it very, in my opinion, in a very clunky manner, explains 4 or 5 different things. It explains the Hurley bird. It explains Room 23, where they brainwash the people from the series. It explains the polar bears. It explains
the pregnancy.
The pregnancy. And then after that, it cuts and he goes to the mental institution where Walt is, and he's like, "Hey, you're not crazy. We actually want you back on the island. We need you." That stuff's great. I actually think that should have been in the finale.
Yes, Billy. Like, it's not that I didn't like what I saw. It's more like, why is this if you thought we needed this explanation, then give it to me when the show's on.
Well, I think the Walt stuff is great and should have been the finale. I think everything before then, every explanation I heard in this Dharma video was like, yeah, that's about what I thought. If we already knew that electromagnetic stuff was causing problems with, people's bodies and the pregnancy and stuff, I didn't need you to really spell it out even more. Same with the polar bears. You tell me that Dharma is just running experiments. I could put 2 and 2 together. You needed a polar bear for one of your experiments you were doing. Done. Get it. I don't need you to explain it.
I don't know. It doesn't really, living in Los Angeles, when you're driving around, you see all these palm trees. And at this point, it's not confusing to us because it just looks like part of LA. But remember the first time you heard that palm trees are not indigenous to California and that all of the palm trees were brought here? It gives you like this sense of ownership over it. Like, how cool is that? They're not even from here. I felt that way about the polar bear, where it was like, I invested 6 years into this show and I don't know why the polar bears are here. I would like some kind of explanation when I'm looking at the polar bear and I'm seeing that we're on an island. How'd you get here? Why? And why? Why?
I guess
it's not
maybe
that I couldn't think about it in my head. Like,
sure,
it's inconceivable that somebody could bring them here. No, it was clear that they had been brought here, but why?
I guess maybe it's just me, where it's just like, I didn't really care. It's like, that wasn't the important part of the story to me. It was just like, yeah, you guys do a bunch of weird, crazy science experiments, and these are probably all some form of that. Done. Let's get back to, like, give me another flashback. Give me another flash forward. Let me know more about these characters. But that again, I'm not saying that's not a valid criticism that people have. I also just think, like, I think people were so upset. At least a large number of people were so upset with this finale that this just, when you talk about fan service, there's good fan service, like maybe the last 40 minutes of Avengers Endgame, where it all feels earned. And then there's just like, this feels like the worst pandering kind of fan service to me.
Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. I think that had they known, obviously hindsight's 2020, but had they known what the reception of the finale was going to be, I don't think the finale would have been the finale. I think that if they knew what fans were going to feel, they would have added some of that stuff in the final couple of episodes. But I think they legitimately thought that they nailed this finale. And then once they heard what the fans were saying, they were like, we could answer that. Yeah, okay, well, maybe we go for that. Because they didn't film the Benjamin Linus stuff while they were filming the final season, correct? They shot this
afterwards, right?
Right. So I think that they just really they overlooked it. They thought that people would be more similar to you, in the sense that they thought people wouldn't care. But then there were more people like me who were like, wait, I'm a huge question asker. every time I watch something, I question, you know me, Billy, like in life, I have 50 follow-up questions. So I don't need you to answer all 50, but like maybe 10, give me a few.
Sure.
And I've never been, speaking of finales, there's a lot of controversial finales, Lost being one of the biggest ones, but like, okay, Sopranos, right? People kind of can interpret what exactly happens at the end there. There's all different finales where I feel like some of them I'm okay not knowing the answer to. Oh, okay, that's interesting. I can decide it for myself, and my friend and I have different opinions. But for this one, the fact that everybody seems to have a different concept of even what happened here, it just didn't land clearly the way that they were hoping for it to. Like, what do you think, Billy? What is your interpretation even of the finale?
I mean, for me, I first of all, like, it takes a lot for me to get emotional at like a fictional movie or television. There's just something about me where like I can empathize enough to enjoy or whatever, but it takes a lot for me to get sucked into that point. And I was an emotional wreck for this finale. And I think the minute that you kind of reveal that this is not some alternate universe in the sense of like, here's what it would have been like if the crash didn't happen. It's this idea that it's almost a separate story in a sense. And maybe the mistake of the whole thing was misleading people by making it, the whole season, making it feel like it was an alternate dimension. Because if you had strung all those together into one final episode, maybe that was your epilogue. Oh, it's beautiful to me. This idea that these people all were, lost as people, but within each other found some sense of community, found some sense of purpose, found some sense of self. And this vision of once you go to their version of the afterlife, it's like everyone's slowly kind of waking up to the fact that they had passed away, but that they would find each other in the next life. And then, one of my favorite lines of Lost period is when Jack is with his dad and he's like, "Are we leaving?" He's like, "Not leaving, moving on." The fact that they're going to move on to the next kind of adventure, whatever it is, together. I don't know. It's just such a beautiful ending to me, juxtaposed with like what's happening on the island. Jack is dying, but he's experiencing this at the same time. Like, I don't know. The emotional payoff was just so big for me that I just didn't care about the Dharma and all that stuff. Like, it didn't interest me as much as that moment.
But had it interest you for the rest of the show? Because if you're not interested in it, in a way, that's a problem, because we spend so much time with all of that luckily the show focused on what you wanted it to focus on for the finale. But the fact that you don't care about things that we spent so much time on seems like there was a lot of wasted time.
But to be fair, the show also spent a ton of time just getting us inside the heads of these characters, so that to see them in a somewhat happy ending, although I firmly disagree that that Saeed would be with Shannon in the aftermath. Like, dude, you knew her for like 2 weeks.
No, come on. I loved their relationship.
No, I didn't mind the relationship, but are you telling me like the whole time he's just pining over his lost love, and then in the afterlife he goes with the girl that he knew for 2 weeks?
It's better than Ian Somerhalder being with his sister, like I would much rather see Saeed get the lady. Like it was I think that they did something. They awakened a part of each other's souls that they didn't know that they had. I legitimately really enjoyed that relationship, and I stand by that. And I think that what's the strongest part of a relationship is when you both make each other better. And I think that they both made each other better. So I'm okay with that. I always struggled with who I wanted Kate to be with, who I wanted Sawyer to be with. Like, that was really hard for me. I didn't know.
Oh, that wasn't hard for me at all.
You just loved Sawyer and Juliet and Kate and Jack?
Oh, absolutely. I knew the minute that they hooked up that they were not right for each other, and this was a summer fling. Yes.
The whole time that I usually am on a clear ship. Like, all of my other shows that I watch that everybody makes fun, like the Vampire Diaries of the world and stuff, I'm always on a clear ship. For this, I did not know what to do. I didn't know what to feel. I felt like that was a true part of life, where sometimes you get sidetracked with somebody who might not be the right person for you. But part of me at the end was like, I don't know, Freckles and Sawyer, like maybe that was, I don't know. I don't know. That was tough for me.
I mean, I think maybe they had a little bit more chemistry. Yes, agreed. But when I think about the characters, I think Sawyer and Kate are so similar that they don't necessarily bring out the best in each other, in the sense that, like, Kate brings out a side of Jack that no one else could, and vice versa. And I definitely think that, a little bit of Juliet rubs off on and softens up Sawyer. I just feel like the matches make more sense. Maybe there's more electricity, but you can't. It's never gonna
Juliet
work.
and Jack too, though. I feel you, and I think that I ended the way that I would prefer, but that complication I always thought about that, because I was just like, wow, it never happens to me where I'm so torn, and I was.
I actually like when Sawyer and Kate hooked up in that polar bear cage.
Yeah.
Ugh. I mean, first of all, how bad would that have smelled? Like
I don't
they
care.
hadn't. No,
That was like, you didn't want that to happen.
no. It was Joey and Rachel for me all over again. I'm like,
no.
stop this immediately.
Wow, no, it was a long time coming. Mm-hmm.
I needed them to reverse, and they did, and I don't know if I don't know if that was, that's one of those things where that's really one where I'm like, did they really have an idea, or did they just want to try out both guys with Kate and see how the audience reacted before they picked a lane?
I have no idea. Did they even know that Juliet was going to be a character?
I mean, she's a part of it by that point, because
No, I know, but I'm saying in the show, like, at what point were they like, oh, we've got to bring on another person?
Just like adding to the main group of people.
Yeah.
I don't know. Juliet is one of those characters that I feel like was so perfectly written, in the sense that she had this obstacle to overcome, because when you first meet her, you really kind of dislike her.
And you don't trust her.
And you don't trust her, and then you find her backstory, and she's super sympathetic, and then you're rooting for her, but no one else trusts her. And they do this with a couple characters. I mean, obviously Sawyer was the first one right off the bat, where you just assume he's going to kind of be the bad guy. You never think John Locke, or quote unquote Locke, is going to end up being the bad guy in the show.
Yeah, Sun and Jin too. You like go through phases with them. Do you like?
Oh, could you imagine when you first started watching that you would end up loving Jin?
No way. But oh
Yeah.
my God. I mean, it's one of the most heartbreaking moments of the entire show is their death. Like, that one gets me. I know that Charlie's is the number one and not Penny's boat forever, but like the Sun and Jin drowning moment, holy crap. That was like, whew, chills.
I will say, maybe this is not, Charlie was like the one character I never totally loved.
He's my favorite character.
Is he really?
Yeah.
I mean, he's a lot of people's favorite, to be fair. But when that happened, it didn't punch me in the gut as maybe some of the other character deaths. But wait, I do want to talk about character deaths real quick, because again, in the era of Game of Thrones, people would always talk about, like, you never knew if your favorite character was safe. The Red Wedding kind of took us all,
right,
if you didn't read the books, by surprise. But I think people fail to remember back to Lost, where it's like, this is a network television show. The rules are different. And major characters could go at any week, and they did, especially in those first couple seasons.
Who are you referencing in the first couple of seasons?
Because, well, yeah, you think about Shannon, who definitely got shot. Then you think about Libby and why am I blanking on Michelle Rodriguez's character's name?
I can't think of it either.
Is it?
Now,
it's like Anna Lucia.
Anna Lucia, yeah.
Just going and shocking, and then Boone, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So like, there's definitely major characters who didn't make it out of that show, and it kept
Charlie,
you on your
Mr.
Echo. So again, there's behind the scenes stuff, and there's that theory that if you got a DUI, you got killed a couple weeks later. But either way, there's a lot of shocking moments in those, at least in those first couple seasons.
Yeah, there are, but that's part of the benefit of having a network show with that many characters, which like this was a true ensemble show. And even though I would say at the end of the day, it really was like Jack, Kate, Sawyer, Locke. I think so. At the like main helm of it, there really were so many major players in this. Claire, like that was crazy as well. So yeah, every time that we would lose somebody, I remember being shocked by Boone. That was the one that like I really was like, what? It's really just gonna go Boone? No way. But it happened.
I think Libby was the one that caught me the most, just because we had just really started to dig into her backstory, and then we learned like, oh, there's something maybe dark about this character, and then she was gone, and that was kind of like that was an interesting rug pull, and that's one that in hindsight feels like that maybe wasn't definitely a mistake, and maybe feels like that wasn't thought out 100%. Kind of like there's two characters we should talk about, because we talked about the fan service of the epilogue, but Nikki and Paolo has to be.
I mean, how do you speak about this show and talk about the flaws and not mention Nikki and Paolo?
I mean, that was probably the most meta episode, was the one where they wrote them off.
I'm looking for Nikki and Paolo defenders. I've never found one. Because what was your intention here?
It must have just been to like bolster, like at a certain point. Well, think about it too. I think the worst episode of this show, possibly of any TV series of all time, one of the worst episodes of television I've ever seen, was the Jack's tattoo episode. It was so laughably awful that it was painful. And you realize at a certain point, it's like, we can only flash back so much on some of these characters. My thought has to be that they were like, well, what if we introduce a couple new ones and just pretend they were there the whole time to maybe get some different kinds of backstories? And
like
boy, was that a miscalculation.
But I just can't believe you can have a writer's room of people who were like, yeah. No, yeah, this is, yep. No, yeah, this. Let's go forward with this. Because I don't know anybody who sits here and says like, yeah, that was a good idea. Or see what they were going for. It's just like, woof. But I guess that happens sometimes. You just really miss the mark. And all shows do this. So even the greatest shows, you mentioned my favorite show of all time, Friends, the Joey Rachel storyline, woof. I mean, you just botched an entire. Why did you guys do that? Why did you do it? And now looking back, they're like, shouldn't have done it. Shouldn't have done it. Bad decision. And I don't think anybody stands up for this choice of Lost. Like nobody worked on it. Nobody watched it. Nobody.
This also seems like one of the quickest, like, okay, sorry, that I've ever seen a show too.
Yeah, immediately, but better that than the alternative.
Well, it's interesting too, because when that episode came out that wrote them off, that was around the same time where they announced like the end date of the show. Hey, we're going to go for 3 more seasons after this. They're going to be shorter. We want to kind of lay it out. And I kind of feel like, especially if you go back and rewatch the series now, there definitely is a momentum shift after that episode. The back half of season 3 really feels, like you're building towards something, as opposed to just like the middle of season 3 and the beginning is just like, what are we doing? We're walking in circles around this island. And then by season 4, that's one where I didn't know how I felt about the direction. And I kind of feel like this is a show that, had the Netflix model been invented back in the day, this show would have been much more beloved, in my opinion. It's pretty beloved now, but
season 4 would have been phenomenal. Yeah.
Binging does this show maybe more benefit than any other show I can think of.
Yeah, I agree. Like, because the lack of answers and like some of the slower burns for people is just too difficult when it's week to week, and sometimes those week to weeks have a month hiatus in the middle of them. And it's just like, what the actual F? But yeah, I think that it's interesting that you said that about the back half of season 3 and into season 4, though, because a lot of people struggle with season 4. A lot of people are not a fan of the shift that then takes place for season 4 and even 5. And I always really liked the decisions that they made here.
Are
I
you speaking specifically to the time travel element?
Yeah. But for me, I thought that really worked.
It's I think that's where, when I talk about, bringing this back to, I think that's about where my sister jumped off. When it's like,
Did she never finish?
I don't, if she did, we certainly stopped talking about it. Cause it used to be like we would text, or she would come over to my apartment at the time and we would watch. And, I think she fell off. I never fell off, but I think that's where it was like, oh, time travel and magnets. I'm out. You can have time travel, you can have magnets, but you can't have them both. No.
The more sci-fi we get, the more that my sci-fi heart beats. It's like,
Right.
What's happening here? But that's the thing. If you're going to switch into that direction where you're playing around with magnetism and you're playing around with time and doing that thing that Christopher Nolan does, I guess. Like if you're going to start shifting things in our focus, then you need to do what sci-fi also does, which is provide some answers for me.
Yeah, and I will say I do feel it's around season 4 too, where, when you look back, it's, to me, seasons 1 and 2, maybe season 2 is my favorite. And I just have to say, I came to the show a little bit later. I came in right before they started season 3. So I binged season 1 and 2 in the span of like 2 weeks. I missed a lot of college classes because I was up all night. And I think even though there were elements of the show that still were a little sci-fi, or at least kind of veering, maybe Stephen King-esque, they were really asking deep philosophical questions at the same time. When you think about the numbers being entered and the button is kind of just like this classic, like, it's like that psychological experiment of like, who's really in control? Is this something, like free will and choices? And I feel like as we got into 4 and 5, there was still a lot of that philosophical type stuff, but it was maybe not quite as subtle. It was focusing a lot more, like I said, on the plot elements of it. And that's where I, to kind of illustrate my point of like, I think I'm more interested in the human conflict of it rather than the constructs of the plot.
Yeah, I think that in order to love the show, you have to be. Because the things that move your soul are the things that keep you coming back every week. And anybody who loves the finale, or at least likes the finale, and honestly, frankly, the entire final season, it's more about what you find in yourself through these characters and what you feel about them and their relationships that like really comes to light. Because if you were too obsessed with the how, what, when, where, why of it all, then you were screwed. You had to focus on the who.
Do you have a favorite episode, or at least one that, at least or maybe a favorite moment of an episode? It's too hard to pinpoint.
Through the Looking Glass is a huge one for me, and The Constant. Those are two massive ones for me. Through The Constant is like maybe a perfect episode of television. That
was another character that they added that I felt like
is one of the greatest additions to any cast ever.
Which I never would have thought with the limited time he got at the up front. And then season 3, once he doesn't turn that key, that character becomes almost like the heart of this show.
He really is. He really does become the heart of the show. So because I think Through the Looking Glass was part 1, part 2, and I absolutely adore that. But for me, The Constant is like, if you want to explain what Lost is to somebody on its best day, in its heart of hearts and its truest moments, like I love Desmond and Penny. I loved their relationship. I loved watching all of this sci-fi stuff like come full circle and completely work here. I think that this showed you like the best of humanity and the worst of humanity, and just it's a perfect. It's almost like a short. It's almost like a movie. Like it's just packaged so perfectly to me, and talk about an episode that made me emote. I mean, it's not even about any of the main favorite characters, and yet I'm like weeping for this episode. So I think that that's probably my favorite. But what about you?
Well, it's funny because my favorite episode is also not about one of our main characters, and it comes from the last season, the one that I think a lot of people didn't like. But Ab Abierto, the backstory of Richard, and how he came to the island and how he became immortal. There's something about this.
Interesting one for you to pick.
Why is that?
Because I think that that's more of a controversial episode than
I think anything that has to do with Jacob and his brother ends up being one that you're either with it or you're not. But kind of seeing, that was really, like there's two aspects of that episode I really like. One is just finding out about, to me at the time, one of the most mysterious characters on that show, which was Richard, and finding out that this guy who just seemed like he was almost like a politician of the island, really had this tragic, like he had a good heart and just he was dealt such a bad hand. On the other side, we were finally starting to get to the point of the show where the lore and the mythology were, whether you liked it or not, were starting to be shown a little bit. And to see kind of this war between the brothers with Richard at the center of it, it really spoke to me at the time. And I think that, coupled with Beyond the Sea, which people, again, they hate that episode, and I love that episode. I'm with that story, so more of that kind of stuff was really there for me. But to tie the human element with Richard to the mythology, like, to me, that's like the best parts of Lost.
Yeah, I think that it's fair. It's fair. And I do think that this is like on a lot of people's top 10 lists, but it is just a little more controversial because similar to what I said about taking you away from the rest of the story, it kind of does. It's kind of not that it's not relevant, because obviously it is, and there's so much mystery around it, but it's almost its own little movie. It's its own little world. And some of the best episodes of Lost were that. Like, another one of my favorites is Walkabout. I think that episode is probably a top episode for a lot of people too, because it's just so phenomenal in that reveal of John Locke when you're just like, what? And it being so early on. The pilot obviously was incredible too. So there's been a lot of standalone episodes. I think this show probably has the most single episodes that would be, if I was making like a top 100 episodes of television of all time, I think this show would have the most episodes in that top list, because there were so many episodes that made your jaw just hit the floor.
I can't think of a pilot that ends in a way that makes you have to watch the next one more than long. That is, by the way, this show I don't think gets enough credit for just how, like, I'll use the word scary it actually was. And the last 2 minutes of the pilot, part 2, at least, if you're watching on Blu-ray, with them standing around trying to decode that message, to this day creeps me out. It gives me the chills and scares me.
Even with the eyes and everything, like the way that it's shot, it's creepy. It's creepy. Wow, I want to go rewatch The Constant. That's got to be my favorite episode of like any TV show ever. It's so beautiful, Billy. Oh, come on.
True love. But again, you gravitate towards more of the emotion than you do maybe the mechanics of The Constant, because if you really start to pick apart The Constant, like, it doesn't make a ton of sense
to me. Like the way they explain the logic with the flying and the plane and how it doesn't, it was like sci-fi meets heart, and that's what this show is to me. And it's interesting that comes in season 4, which I said was a controversial season for a lot of people, but I loved, with the times in the back and the forth, and just everything. That's got to be this got to be the best episode of TV ever. It might be The Constant.
So we've talked a lot about the stuff we love. Look, I'm not going to try to say this is a perfect show. I do want to talk about a couple of the things that, man, I wish we could go back and fix. I don't really like that they brought Michael back and then just wasted him for, like, a handful of episodes later. That always kind of bugged me because I really liked the character of Michael, his relationship with Walt, and I just feel like it was a fatal flaw to have Walt be as young as he was, because you knew they were going to have to figure out some way to get him out of there because he was going to age out of, being there for too long.
Yeah, I think that both Walt and Michael's character didn't do exactly what I wanted either of them to do. I think that some of the other things that we've mentioned, like, while they had a lot of amazing deaths, they had a lot of ancillary strange characters. Obviously, we talked about two of them that we could have definitely lived without and didn't need to have entire episodes on Paolo. Just never again.
A lot of people, look, even some of the, I know it wasn't a lot, and so I'm not going to harp on it, but it was just like Rose and Bernard. I was like, I don't need a ton on you guys. I get it. That's great. Love it. See you later. Like, don't spend too long. Those were characters. I guess it's like you said, there's just so many
sweet.
They
were.
They're very sweet.
And they actually had a lot to do in the final season, or the final episode. So it kind of made a little sense.
I'm not saying it didn't make sense. It was more just like, there are 1,000 things we need to get to. I don't necessarily want to be here with you. The other thing is, oh, go ahead. No, please.
I had some issues with Ben and Locke stuff. Some of the Ben Locke stuff didn't make full sense to me. Like Ben saving Locke, and then Ben killing Locke, and then just some of it was just like, what's happening here? Also, Locke was one of my least favorite characters, so that was kind of like, anytime him and Ben would be in coming to blows, or like when Ben was stopping Locke from committing suicide, but then just like murders him right after. Just some of those stuff, I was just like, what? Why are we? What?
So in wrestling, when a good guy turns bad, they call it a heel turn.
Thank you. If you think that I don't know that,
I'm not looking at you.
That was such a heel move of you. Okay,
I'm looking at my non-wrestling audience listening.
They're a bunch of faces, aren't they?
But Ben had more heel turns in this show than I could possibly count. I think he, and the story is that he wasn't even meant to be a main cast member, and he was just so good.
Yeah, he was amazing.
Yeah, and he is. I'm actually kind of surprised. I know he did another series that I didn't watch after this, but I'm surprised he didn't get more main film roles and bigger roles after this.
Yeah, because he does that creepy villain thing real well.
Actually, no one did, really. I think Evangeline Lilly, even Ant-Man was years down the road. It wasn't right after Lost she was in everything I saw.
What was that Sawyer show that was on every single poster everywhere, somewhere in Hawaii or something, right?
I couldn't even tell. I remember they made a big deal he's going to be in Mission Impossible. I'm like, dude gets capped in the first 2.5 minutes.
What was the name of it? It was like a...
I couldn't even tell you.
No, it went for seasons and seasons, I think. I think that this was a big deal for him. Let me find. It was one of those... I mean, I know this was in Hawaii also, but I'm telling... It was... Josh Holloway was on the big poster of... The hell was it? Let's see. Colony? Is that it? No. Yeah.
No.
Colony for 2 years? I don't know. Okay, well...
I mean, Josh Holloway is... Look... Whatever the series is or isn't or was or wasn't, I do think that it was strange that he didn't have a bigger career after this. I don't, Daniel Day Kim.
I was just thinking of him. He got a lot of work after.
But he kind of stayed in the TV lane. I don't think there was any major breakout. I mean, you could argue that Michelle Rodriguez was kind of already established by the point that she was on the show. So I don't know if I count her necessarily.
I see Jorge Garcia pop up in a ton of stuff all the time. Oh, wow, I didn't even know this. I'm looking on IMDb right now. Jorge Garcia was in Hawaii 5-0 for 130 episodes. So
with Daniel Day Kim?
Let's see. Yep. Well, who was in it for 168 episodes?
And again,
Damn, who knew?
Dominic Monaghan was already in Lord of the Rings by the time he got here. So, and Ian Somerhalder, I don't know, was this before or after Vampire Diaries?
This was pre-Vampire Diaries. I actually think the last season that he was in of this was the first year of Vampire Diaries. Maybe that's even why. I don't know.
Why it meshed them. I just thought, Matthew Fox would be a bigger star coming out of this. He did that one where the president gets shot, and I don't even remember what it's called. And then he did Speed Racer, which did not perform the way people thought it would. Same with who I think was a really great actor, and I just have never seen anything again, was Naveen Andrews, who plays Saeed in this.
He's really incredible, and also dreamy. So just throwing that
he's
out
incredibly
there.
dreamy.
Yeah.
I think he's a handsome man. I'm married with a child. I feel like I can say that comfortably. He's a handsome man.
It is weird though, and I will say that probably, regardless of before or after or when they got their fame, probably the most famous person on the show is Evangeline Lilly.
Definitely, and look, you get the Marvel rub. You're set for life. And
didn't she do some not great like vaccination stuff this year or something? I'm kind of having flashbacks of some not positive Evangeline Lilly things.
Which was weird because Daniel Day Kim like the day before came out with like, I have COVID, everyone please be careful.
I'm just remembering something. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I'm sorry, do your research, but like I kind of remember this year being like, no, Evangeline, no.
Well, regardless, the acting on the show, I do think like the fact that you have so many characters and the fact that almost all of them are memorable one way or another, is pretty. It speaks a lot to the casting of this show. You said it's an ensemble show, and I agree. I think you take away any part of that major core, and this show doesn't work.
I'm feeling not great about the fact that they didn't go on to be like massive stars. I'm surprised. I'm trying to think about like even I know that Claire, what's her name? Emily de Raven. She was on Once Upon a Time. I watched for a long time after too, but like a lot of them, I feel like they were so talented. Their caliber of acting is just like so huge. You would think that we would have some big ass movie stars, but it's just not the case.
Yeah, and it's always tough too. Like the more popular a show is, the harder it's going to be to get work afterwards if you've been on it. Just because that's how people remember you. Look, how many movies and shows have you seen Hugh Laurie in since House ended? Yeah,
that's a good point.
But then again, I'm sure they're living nice off the residuals of Lost. Which, by the way, Lost, ABC, Disney. Why is Lost not on Disney Plus?
Is it not?
It's not.
Maybe they were licensing it. I mean, is it this like a Friends situation with an NBC and Warner Brothers type?
No, it's ABC Studios. So
it is, huh?
Yeah, they must just have an agreement in place with somebody right now.
Where can you watch Lost right now? I'm curious.
It used to be Netflix. I have no idea.
Okay, it's on Hulu, so that's why.
Okay. Well, I think it should move over to Disney Plus, and the ending of the New Man in Charge epilogue does kind of give way to this period on the island that obviously we're never going to see, where Hurley was in charge. Is that something
we're never going to see it?
I was just about to ask, is that something you would even want to see?
I think with the revival of Dexter coming, it made me really start to think of like shows that didn't have universally loved finales, what they could do. And I think that Lost could really benefit from another season. I think that it would have to be different than what it was. Obviously, we couldn't come back with all the same characters and be like, just kidding, we found peace, but now we didn't. Turmoil. But I do think we could do a Hurley, Walt, Benjamin, Linus, what the hell is happening there? And that might leave a little bit better of a taste in people's mouths.
The trend of coming back to finish things off, it's really hit or miss. The first thing that pops in my head when I think of those were the kind of limited seasons of the X-Files, which had more bad than good. And honestly, that show went out with a whimper, and then it came back with a bang and ended with a whimper again. It's like, do you just leave well enough alone at this point?
Yeah, some of them do that, but like I don't know, some of them have better reactions. Obviously different genre, but like a Gilmore Girls, people were really excited about that. Sometimes it just works, and like I think that if something's great when it ends, don't touch it. But this was, for me, this was a mediocre ending.
Fair. I also think too, like, we talked at the very beginning, and this kind of brings the conversation full circle. Lost was such an anomaly in the sense of like a major production serialized on broadcast television. Like I said, Game of Thrones is a nice kind of parallel example where it's like there was a major motion picture every week with Game of Thrones, but you were on premium television and you kind of didn't have, like the idea of serialized storytelling was a little bit more built in with something more premium like an HBO. Like, would Lost even have the same impact if it comes back today, now with the last 10 years of television that we've had that has redefined what TV even is?
If Lost had never happened and the title of this was not Lost, I don't think it would even make a splash. But because Lost has such a massive fandom, I think coming back, and if they found a way to do something that was like an 8-episode, awesome, 1-season mini, like what happened after, I think people would eat it up with a spoon and ask for more. And hopefully they wouldn't give us more, because that's when I think it could be really bad. But like, if they just gave us, Billy, don't you think with a Benjamin Linus, Hurley, Walt, afterwards on the island, 8-episode miniseries of just like how it all went down, wouldn't you watch that?
They definitely leave some breadcrumbs that I would love to, they definitely, the one where, he says like, you have to go back, Walt, we have to help your dad, meaning that there are still souls and still people that can't move on from the island. I would kind of love to
we don't even know that that's
more.
the case, because they said Michael's dead, and he says that doesn't mean you can't help him. It could just mean like living on his legacy or whatever. But yeah,
it could. But also too, just the idea of like Michael's definitely not at the church at the end,
no,
so
for
we
sure
know that
not. Yeah,
he hasn't moved on to wherever he's eventually going to go.
Because he's got a lot of explaining to do.
He does. He still has a lot to atone for.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, I know we're off of this, but I do love the full character arc of Benjamin Linus coming, where he's like, I'm not ready to move on with you guys yet because I haven't quite earned it yet. I still have a lot that I need to
like more
make
so
up
than
for.
haven't quite, like you killed mad people, yo. You did horrible things.
He did horrible things, but I like that it's
me too.
the acknowledgement of like he still has more learning and growing to do in whatever this version of purgatory ends up being. So people were kind of right. People weren't wrong per se with their theories.
Like that.
Yeah, it does bother me too, by the way. When Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker came out, and a lot of people didn't like that one, and they said, well, J.J. Abrams doesn't know how to end things. Clearly, J.J. Abrams had almost nothing to do with Lost by the time the show ended.
Straight up, probably didn't even watch the finale.
I don't even know if he watched the show past maybe the first season.
Yeah, but I will say who did, and who I have like is my favorite ever, is Damon Lindelof, man. Like, he, to me, to go on Leftovers being possibly even better than Lost, and then Watchmen, like, this man knows how to make a show that I give a shit about. Like,
Damon Lindelof I have such a weird relationship with him because I do love what he did with Lost. And then he brought the same Lost sensibilities over to Prometheus, and that was a nightmare. It was a mess. I feel like Damon Lindelof he's a special ingredient that if you plug him into every meal, it's not always going to taste good.
Did you not end up watching The Leftovers?
No, but I didn't mean, by the way, to make a food connection with leftovers and ingredients, but go ahead.
Billy, this is your, like, stop what you're doing, stop raising a child and ignore your wife for a few days and watch the show. Like, this is more than worth your time, especially for somebody who cares about characters and people. I mean, it is the greatest show ever. Like, to go from Lost, which is one of my favorite shows, to Leftovers, and to have my least favorite of all of his shows be Watchmen, maybe, which is still such a phenomenal show. Give him a break for Prometheus and look past it, because you got to get on that binge train.
The binge train is I only get 1 hour of television a night, so
And
it may take me a while.
This is it. Well, there's only 30 episodes.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because there's only 3 seasons.
Oh, well, see, that's a horse of a different color.
You've got this. I believe in you.
That's a solid just month.
I'll meet you back here, and we can talk about Leftovers in 1 month.
So look, we're ending our talk on Lost. I think it's fair to say that maybe the legacy of Lost is complicated, but I don't think you can. I don't think it's hyperbole. I don't think I'm overstating that. When you think of the shift of television becoming so premier and so prestige, that Lost is at least one, it's on the Mount Rushmore. It is one of the founding fathers of this new era of television.
Completely agree. I'm with you. It's up there. And everything past it is kind of standing on its shoulders.
What a perfect sentiment to end the show on. So I can go, I guess, watch The Leftovers now and eat some leftovers.
You'll thank me.
Do you ever eat leftovers while watching Leftovers?
All I do is eat leftovers.
That's
all I do. I feel like, how is it possible? I'm never eating fresh food. I'm only eating leftovers. Quarantine.
Roxy, the ultimate pack rat, the ultimate TV watcher. Thank you for taking the time to talk one of my favorite shows and one of your favorite shows.
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk Lost for years to come. That's how you know it's great.
Well, next week we're talking about something a little less great, but I still like it. We're talking Too Fast, Too Furious with Mark Hoffmeyer coming on the show from Rotten Tomatoes. He's a good friend of mine. He's a very interesting guy, so I'm looking forward to talking with him. Thank you so much for liking, subscribing, all that fun stuff. Check out Reboot It on YouTube, season 3 going strong. Roxy Striar live at the Roxy. Is it? It's like every single day,
every
right?
Day. Billy, I've gone 235 days in a row during quarantine. I have not taken one day off.
I don't think I've done anything 235 days in a row.
Get me out of here. Help. Send help.
Send help over to Roxy's Patreon and live chats.
Yeah.
Send her help. Thank you so much for listening. I'll see you guys next week.